Today is October the 29th, 1997. We're at Abilene Christian University, and my name is Charlie Henson. I'm talking with Marvin this afternoon about the 12th Armored Division. He was a member of the 17th Armored Infantry Battalion. Thanks for coming.
You're quite welcome.
First of all, I want us to talk a little bit about Camp Barkley here in Abilene. And you were telling me a story about rattlesnakes a few minutes ago.
Rattlesnakes were a big thing in any part of West Texas. And you know, even now they have rattlesnake roundups out here. But when we were in the service at Barkley, that was one thing that we were warned about constantly. It was out in the field, is being careful of rattlesnakes. In fact, each man carried a razor blade taped inside his helmet in case he was bitten by a rattlesnake. You'd make a cross cut right at the incision and then suck that venom from the wound until we could get him to the hospital. And of the 9 months that I was in Camp Barkley, I never saw one rattlesnake. And I don't suppose, or I don't know of any of men in my platoon that saw a rattlesnake. But yesterday, we were making a tour of old Camp Barkley and walking down a concrete main street out there and talking about rattlesnakes. Dr. Williams and the photographer were backing up. Maurice, George, and I were walking along, pointing and talking about what it used to be. And I talked about the rattlesnakes and looked up, and Dr. Williams and the photographer were about 3 feet of a rattlesnake that was stretched across that concrete walk. We yelled for them to look out, and they looked around and jumped out of the way. And we thought that was quite a coincidence. We were talking about rattlesnakes, and there's one stretched across. It was laying out there sunning. It never did call or anything to strike. But any rattlesnake is bad, so far as I'm concerned.
In previous tapes, we've talked about your experiences at Camp Barkley. I'd like for you to talk about entry and your movement up in the ranks. You were an officer at one time. Can you kind of give me the history of that?
Well, I was commissioned a second lieutenant at Fort Benning, Georgia on January the 6th, 1944. When at infantry officer school. When we graduated, our company commander, while we were students, gave each of us our assignment just before we were graduating. There were 12 of us that he didn't call our names out for an assignment until the very last. And everyone else had gone, and here we were standing there wondering what was going to happen. And he came over to where we were and kind of laughed, and he said, "Did I scare you guys?" He said, "You're going to graduate." But he said, "You're being assigned to the 12th Armored Division." And we all looked at each other and thought, what in the world are we going to do in an armored division? And he said, "We've never before, I haven't had anyone assigned to an armored division." He said, "I have no idea what you might be doing. But he said, I understand that maybe they have some kind of a combat patrol outfit that you will probably be leading. But anyway, good luck." So from there, I reported the 12th Armored Division at Camp Barkley, Texas on about January 20th, 1944. As a brand spanking new second lieutenant, and found out then that there was armored infantry, and quite a few infantry officers were assigned to the armored division.
As I understand, you brought your wife to Abilene. Did she come to Abilene?
Yes.
Kind of give me where y'all lived and kind of how she fit in to the system.
Well, as I said before, I graduated from OCS on January the 6th. The train from Atlanta, Georgia came through San Antonio, and I had dated Maribel while we were waiting to go to OCS and stationed at Fort Sam Houston. and I wanted to stop and visit with her on the way home. So while we were visiting, we decided to get married. So on January 11th, we got married. Then she withdrew from school. She was in nurses training at the old, I believe it's P&S Hospital, School of Nursing. She withdrew from school, and we continued on then to my home in Garland, and then from there on into Camp Barkley. Might tell about the train. Trains then were carried so many passengers, you was lucky to get on one. But they would put you on it as long as they could stack on. We were able to get on the train, but we had to sit on a suitcase in the area between the cars. So that was our trip home, and then the same thing on to Abilene. When we arrived at the train station in Abilene, we spent the first few days at the Grace Hotel, which was directly across the street. My sister was a student at ACC then. She and her boyfriend, who was from Abilene, were married, and he was in the Air Force. And his parents lived in Abilene. In fact, I don't remember the street they were on, but they helped us get an apartment with the Scruggs family on the College Drive. And at that time, we called it ACC Hill. So we had a very nice little apartment in that house. And Ms. Scruggs and Mr. Scruggs were very nice people. And we enjoyed very much. It's just a little one bedroom with a little partial kitchen and a bathroom. And that's where we lived the entire time.
And did maybe work? Did she work while you were here in town?
No, she didn't. No, some of the officers' wives or some of the men's wives, some of them might have had some part-time jobs, but it was hard then to get a job to do it because there were so many people in the service. And at that time, Abilene was only about 18,000 population. In fact, there was about twice as many soldiers here as there was people in Abilene.
How did you work coming back and forth from Barkley? And were there weeks at a time or days at a time that you didn't come in, or did you come in every night? How did that work?
We rode the bus. Everywhere we went, we rode the bus. Usually on weekends, we were able to come home. Most of the time during the week we could, unless we were on a special maneuver or had guard duty or something like that. We had to stay at camp. But we were, a lot of times we'd come to town and spend maybe 2 or 3 hours with the wives, and then we'd have to go back to camp. But they were very lenient to let us come whenever we had enough time. And buses had a very good service. I've forgotten how often they ran, but it wasn't too bad to ride. Of course, that's all we do then. Nobody had cars. Ride the bus anywhere you wanted to go.
When you got to Camp Barkley, was the 17th already set up, or were you the beginning officer unit and then the men came in, or were the soldiers already in the unit when you got here?
The 12th Armored Division had just undergone the reorganization. When it left Camel, they were reorganized into combat commands that set up the infantry battalions. So when I joined the division, the different battalions had already been set up. And most of the people, most of the men in the cadre were here. But at that time, if they needed troops somewhere else, they'd pull troops away from the 12th and ship them at other places. And it was hard to keep a full cadre. In fact, on some days with men on KP, guard duty, special duty, those on leave, you'd hardly have enough men to train what you were supposed to do. But in April, they started filling our ranks, and at that time is when we started really buckle down and really do training. So they assigned enough men that we had nearly full cadre, and that's when we started a real training. Then after that, no one was transferred out. We pretty well stayed the same. I started out in headquarters company of the 17th. It was either March or the 1st of April, and I was transferred to A company.
And what were your duties specifically in A company?
I was a platoon leader. A platoon leader has the responsibility of the men in his platoon. At that time we had 5 squads. Had 3 rifle squads, a machine gun squad, and a 60mm mortar squad. And I think it totaled about 54 men. We had 5 half tracks and all the equipment, everything. And it was quite a responsibility for a young 21-year-old farm boy to find out that he had was trying to train those men and be sure that they could work as a unit. We were all about in the same shape, but I can't say we enjoyed what we were doing, but we knew we had a job to do, and everybody was really buckled down and really worked hard. A lot of things happened over the years, the different assignments that we had. I know one weekend I was assigned as range officer. Some of the officers in division headquarters never had a chance to go out and fire, and everybody had to know how to shoot a rifle. But some of the attorneys and doctors and people in the general's staff, and I was in charge of the range over a Saturday and Sunday to go out and let those men fire a rifle and learn to shoot. On a rifle range, whoever's in charge he's the boss. And it doesn't make any difference if you're a second lieutenant or a general. Everybody out there firing under you does what you say. And we had one colonel, a lieutenant colonel. You give the command to fire is lock your piece and then load. And so I give the command from the lock and then load their piece to get ready to fire. And he said, he was down a little bit from where I was standing. He said, "Lieutenant, I don't think you're doing that right." He said, "There's no sense in locking and then loading. Why you lock it when there's no ammunition in your rifle?" And I said, "Colonel, the field manual says that you lock your piece and then load it." And I said, "That's the way I'm going to do it, and that's the way you're going to do it." Well, he went on, but he kept mouthing about you didn't understand why you had to do that. In a little while, there was a captain down 4 or 5 spaces down. Came up. He said, "Colonel, it's because of damn fools like you that you have to lock your piece and then load it. Now shut up and leave the lieutenant alone." Turn around and walk. So we didn't hear any more from the colonel. But most of it was hard work.
Okay. Let's move to Herlesheim. We've got a lot of this on your last tape. Let's scoot on over to Herlesheim. First getting there, and then let's work through that day and then the second day. And what happened to you then?
Our unit, the 17th Armored Infantry Battalion, made an attack across the Alsace Plain in the direction towards Herlesheim. We had A Company, B Company. C Company had been detached from our battalion and assigned to another unit a day or two before. So when we were ordered to attack, we only had 2 companies. And we were ordered to attack, I believe it was companies abreast, and to go in to try to capture flat plain. The day before Hurleysheim, before we got to Hurleysheim, we attacked across open terrain, and I had the 1st Platoon of A Company, and my platoon was leading the company. And I was on the right-hand side of the 2nd Platoon, and to my right was what was known as the Steinwall Woods. The 66th Infantry was supposed to have cleared Steinwall Woods, and we didn't know that it hadn't been cleared. That we advanced on up to where the wood was on what would be my right, and we started receiving a lot of machine gun fire and rifle fire and artillery fire. It was just more than we could stand. But we were just laying flat on the frozen ground, receiving all the shelling, and we called for some help to try to knock out the Germans in the woods. And they sent 2 dive bombers in, and they dive bombed those woods. And while that was going on, we withdrew about 500 yards. And by then it was night. So we tried to reorganize as best that we could. I don't remember, we'd had an awful lot of casualties. I know one of my machine gunners had been knocked out, and both the machine gunner and the assistant gunner were both killed. I have received a little bit of criticism from, well, not really criticism, but a man that those men had been hit and nobody wanted to see about them. And nobody had to go see about those men because I was laying right beside them, and I know what the condition is in. I didn't have to go closer to them. But over to my left, there was a man hit, or 2 men, and one was trying to work on one of the wounded. So I went over to see about them, and the one that was helping the other one, half of his shoulder was gone. He didn't know that he had been hit. But that's the way the situation. But anyway, we reorganized and tried to get some sleep that night as the best that we could. And I guess about midnight we had to go down to the battalion headquarters and received orders that at daylight the next morning we were to attack Hurleysheim itself. We were told that there was only about 300 German infantry soldiers left in Hurleysheim, and probably 3 or 4 tanks. So for the attack, since I'd been leading the attack the day before, they let the other 2 platoons lead, and my platoon followed. We hit the edge of town about daylight, and I think it was about 350 German soldiers surrendered. Well, what we were told, that battle should be over because there shouldn't be any more Germans in there. But then as we moved on into town, the fight started. But they had moved a bunch of SS troops and a Panzer or tank division in town. And we hit that. And we were still short one company like we started out.
Let me interrupt. Tell me about your perceptions of those German soldiers. What did you know about the tanks and the SS troops, and what kind of men were you facing at that point?
Well, we knew that the SS troops were some of the best German soldiers that there were. The ones that we had captured were mostly, I think they were probably put out there to surrender because they were soldiers that were older. They weren't, you could tell, they weren't the way they were dressed. They weren't as good as soldiers as some of the other units. But most of the German soldiers were real snappy and gung-ho and did everything according to Hoyle. And these guys just seemed kind of sloppy. Of course, it was cold and bad, and they were hungry. And when they gave up, we didn't have any problem with them. We just lined them up. We caught them before and sent them to the rear. We didn't have to put a guard on them because they was glad to go. But then when we hit those troops up in town, it was altogether different. They were hardcore, ready to fight German soldiers. And so far as they was concerned, they were still going to win the war. So I hadn't thought about that before, but I think maybe it could have been that was kind of a decoy to let those soldiers surrender and pull us on up into town. And then the Germans started to attack. In fact, that's what I did the first day. My platoon just pulled up in the edge of town. And I was in an open, some houses along a creek in the street. And there was a little bit of an open area. Back off to the right, I guess about 500 yards of the railroad. And of course, we thought when we got in there, the first, the second, third platoon was all up ahead of us, so we didn't have a whole lot to worry about. I started walking around the street checking my platoon. I ran into a German officer. And I thought, golly, that man coming in this close, I didn't think there would be any Germans left in there. Then I started receiving some German machine gun fire from my right front. And I knew then that our company and the others too must be getting in trouble, because I couldn't do anything. There I thought I was protected, and there I was open to fire from my right side. And that afternoon, I spent most of my time. I had a map, which I couldn't get a hold of company headquarters. I didn't know where they were. In fact, we were supposed to have radio silence. But the Germans started making an attack. And I thought, I'm going to get on this radio. I've got to do something. So I broke silence, and I had a map that had some pre-planned artillery somewhere they could fire. And I called the artillery and had them fire a couple of rounds where I could see where it would land. Then I adjusted their fire. And we ran the Germans back across the railroad about 3 times that afternoon. It's what saved us from being overrun then. And then one of the other officers came up, I guess, just before dark, and we went up into town, tried to find our battalion and company headquarters, and we never did find anybody. So then we realized that something was wrong, and we knew we were in trouble, but all we knew that we could do was just try to. He said, "Don't you think we ought to try to withdraw or something?" I said, "No, they told us to stay here in town if we had help coming." So I think the best thing to do is just stay here. So that's what we tried to set up as kind of a defense if we could, but it wasn't a whole lot we could do. Didn't hold out through the night. And before, I guess something just after midnight, artillery from the Germans hit. It didn't hit the house that I was in, but it hit a lot of other. And we knew it was as soon as they lifted artillery, they probably the ground troops would come in. Sure enough, the ground troops moved in. They were fighting all around us, and we ran up to a door. Was firing out the door, and the man on my left was hit, and I could hear him gurgle blood, so I knew he was hit in bad shape. And Sergeant Rasmussen was over on the other side, and he was hit with a grenade in the leg. So at that time, I pulled the trigger on my rifle, and it clicked, so I had fired my last round. I had some more ammunition in my belt, but I didn't have time to get it. So I thought the only thing to do was surrender. So me and with the wounded Sergeant Rasmussen and a couple other men, that's where we became prisoners.
What, when you went out the door, and what did you do physically? What do you physically do when you did that?
Well, during the day, when I talked about seeing that German officer, I raised my rifle to shoot him, but two other shots rang out, and some of the men killed him. And I went on up to where he was to see if he had any papers or anything on him. He was carrying a pistol. And I took his pistol off, and one of the guys that shot him, one of the rounds had hit that pistol and knocked the handle off of it. So I held his pistol up, and I turned around to my men and said, "Hey, you killed another one of these guys." I said, "Save that pistol. I'd like to have one of these." I just picked his pistol down on him. Well, later on that day, one of my men, I can't remember which one it was, brought me a German Luger. And I stuck that Luger down inside my field jacket in my belt. So when I went out of that house as a prisoner, I remembered I had that Luger sticking down in my, and I knew I couldn't let them catch me with that Luger. So I was holding back, trying to get that Luger. It was so dark you couldn't see the hand in front of your face, but there were some fires going around, and they were trying to get us to come over. And finally, that before they caught me, that thing broke loose, and I just fixed it on my shoulder. And I thought at first they were going to shoot us, but they took our rings and watches and everything that we had off. They didn't find my lieutenant's bar. I wasn't wearing my bar. I had it in my pocket. And then there were some other troops came up. In fact, there was some SS troops in that second group. First I thought those others were fixing to shoot us. And when this second group came up, and they wanted to search us, that's when they found my bar. So then after that, they took us into a house and started to question me some.
I've heard men talk about not wanting the enemy to know what rank they were or if they were officers. Tell us about that, why that was important not to be caught with your bars. Or
Well, that silver gold bar, if you was wearing it on your uniform, it wasn't the fact that you didn't want them to know, but if that thing would flash in the sun or light, they could tell who you were, because that's the first people they wanted to shoot. Later on in the war, I think they had insignia that was sewn on the uniform that didn't reflect that, so so that's the reason we took ours off, is so that it wasn't necessarily the fact that we didn't want them to know. It's just the fact that that bar would reflect light, and a reflection of light would give you away. And another thing they used to always watch, if an officer or one of the squad leaders would be carrying field glasses, and they'd look for that, and that's the person that they'd shoot at. So we always wore our field glasses around behind our back. I usually carried a dispatch case, which is another giveaway, which is something that anything that you had that you needed to keep was in that little case. So they knew, they learned all that stuff, and it was all that you try to keep hidden or away from them as much as possible.
the interrogation that you went through, did you know German? Did you speak
No.
German? Okay. Did they have English speakers to interrogate?
They had some that spoke some English, yes.
What did an interrogation, what was that like?
I never did go through a real strong interrogation. The soldiers, they would ask name, rank, and serial number, and that's all we were supposed to give. And I would give them my name, rank, and serial number, and then after that, I just said next percent. I don't understand. And being late in the war, they never did. They may sit there and prod things. We'll know you're the 12th Armored Division and all this stuff like that. Now, go ahead and tell me. So, and they'd say, no, next percent. They just repeat your name, right, serial number. And they didn't fool with you much to let you go. But I understand that earlier in the war, and there's a lot of them that received some, but see, this was in January of 45, so getting pretty late.
Tell me about who was captured with you, and if you can tell me the story of from being captured and kind of the journey through, who you knew, if there were men that were with you, and kind of where you went from there. I realize you did lose three weeks that you can't remember, but kind of walk me through that.
Well, I was captured with Sergeant Rasmussen was a squad leader in my platoon, and he's really the only one that I remember being there. But I know there was 2 or 3 other men, and one of them was I believe it was a Corporal Bacalero. Now, the reason I know he was there now is since we've going to reunions, I have discussed with him, and he was one of the men that was, but I still don't know who the other one was. We stayed in Herlisheim, I don't know, I guess it's a couple of hours. And then we walked down to the Rhine River, which was, I don't know, wasn't very far, and rode a barge across the river. We had Sergeant Rasmussen who was bleeding. We had to keep a tourniquet on him, and we found a cart to push him. And then I think it was Baden-Baden is where we walked across to that. And by the time we got there, it was daylight the next morning. And of course, I didn't know, so far as I knew, we were the only people that was captured by the Germans. And I was feeling pretty bad. I was disgusted with myself.
Did you blame yourself, or
yeah,
why would you?
For surrendering. With all those other men still out there, and here I surrendered. And then I'd think, well, there wasn't anything else that I could do. And then I'd get to thinking again, and I could have stayed there and done something. Anyway, when we walked into town, up to a building, and there was Captain Hilton and Colonel Logan, which was the company commander and battalion commander. And I was shocked. I said, my goodness, what in the world? I said, I knew I tried to find y'all yesterday afternoon, I couldn't find you. But they were still in town. They were captured probably just about the time that I was. But they rode a truck back across the river. Of course, they were there ahead of us because we walked. And Captain Helton said, anyway, he said, well, I guess we're here the same reason you are. But anyway, Captain Helton said, Lieutenant Rum, I didn't get a chance to tell you yesterday, but said I received the paper that you've been promoted to first lieutenant. So I spent a lot of my time in prison camp rubbing that gold off of that bar to make it silver. We were only in, now that story is going to tell you what happened that 3 weeks, but all I can remember is after just a day or two after that, we were put on a train, a box, a cattle car, a slatted car, and it was cold. In fact, we found out since then that was one of the coldest winters that Europe's had was 1944, 1945. And stock the center, you didn't have room to sit down and just standing like a bunch of cattle on the trip to Hamburg. And during that trip, they put us on the siding. I think the trip was about 2 days or day and a half. They put us on a siding. And while we were on the siding, there was a train with flat cars on it that had some of our battalion's tanks on it when past us with the Germans had captured the day before. And then we continued on. Then the officers went to Hamburg, and most of the enlisted men that had been captured went to different places. But all the officers went to Hamburg, Offlaw 13B. And we stayed stayed there as prisoners until from, I think about January, but then we found out since it was about February the 10th, until March the 28th, when Captain Baum's task force that General Patton sent in, some said to liberate his son-in-law. His son-in-law was there. But he shot up the camp. We thought the war was over. And we found out after he got in there that he was in 60 miles inside enemy territory to liberate the camp. And he was going to have to try to fight his way back to American lines. And he told us that, he said, we'll let the prisoners out, you can do what you want to. You can take off cross country, or you can go back into camp, wait for Americans to get here. Captain Elton and I was with the group. He was trying to reorganize his group to go back out. And I asked the sergeant who was on the half track. I wanted to get on the half track, and he said, "No, y'all, I can't take y'all. You got to go back or just get out on your own." And I said, "Well, you can use a rifleman, can't you?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, you forget that bar on my collar." He pitched me a rifle, and I crawled on that half track with him. We were going to get out of there. And I think Captain Hilton did something like the same thing. But we hadn't got together yet. We traveled that night. If you hadn't read Captain Baum's The Raid, it's a good book. It's about the raid that he pulled to come in 60 miles and liberate that camp, and then trying to fight his way out. We got about 10 miles, and the Germans cut us off. Of course, by him coming in, they knew he was going to do something. So everywhere we went, the Germans were waiting for us. So finally, we pulled up on some high ground. I don't know exactly how far we were from Hamburg. He decided to try to reorganize and get set, and then try to leave the next morning. Well, the Germans pulled in a couple of 3 divisions and surrounded us with artillery. Came in and knocked us all out the next day. Just before daylight the next morning. And that's when I got with Captain Elton. But the half track we were in had a bunch of money in it. So we said, well, let's get out of here. And we had rifles. So we said, let's get some of this money. So we just poked our cloaks full of money. And then we managed to get away from the Germans, slipped off into, it was a wooded area, slipped off in the woods. And we went till it came to a clearing, because we knew in daylight we couldn't cross that clearing, so we said we'll just wait here and hide in the dark and continue on. A little before dark, there was a German patrol came through and found us. And it was some young German soldiers that were in OCS. And we didn't know what those, they were just kids, 18, 19 years old. Hardcore German. And we didn't know what they were allowed to do with us. But they took us into town. And there was a German flag that had been trampled and was burning in the street. And they made us put that fire out that flag and pick up the pieces of that flag. And one of them, while we were in the process of doing that, found some of that money. Then they started going through us, and they took all that money away from us. And I think that's all that saved our lives, because they were tickled to death. For us. And they were really going after that money. So they took us on down in, and we joined a column of about 100 other others had been recaptured. So we never did go back to camp. We spent them from the 29th of March then until the 2nd of May when we escaped again. We walked every day across Germany. And I don't remember any of the towns. The only town I remember going through was Nuremberg. We got to Nuremberg on the 20th of April, which was Hitler's birthday. And we were out in the edge of Nuremberg when air raid sirens started going off. And I guess it was the 8th Air Force was coming in from England, and we could see them. They were all the way across town. But they came in and turned, and then when they came back across Nuremberg, they dropped their bombs, and they continued on back on. And when it started, the German guards with us put us off the road. There were some trees along, and there was a railroad yard then just past those trees, so they put us off the road into these trees. And of course we were tickled to death. The Americans were bombing Nuremberg. We were laying there on our backs looking up at them coming in and yelling, just having a big time. Those planes would come in and turn and come back over. Each flight would get a little bit closer, closer, closer. Finally the flight came and went right down those railroad tracks. And that's pretty scary and close with all those big bombs going off like we didn't see any more planes coming. And we thought, well, that's the last flight. And then here comes another flight. And we knew where it was going. And sure enough, it went right down our column. And I guess we lost about 30 guards, German guards, and American soldiers. What guards had left at us, we lined up the wounded and dead along the street. And they made us just walk off and leave about. They said somebody would come and take care of them, and I hope that they did. Because some of the German people come around there throwing rocks at us, cursing and everything else. But the guards knew they needed to get us out of there. And then we walked, after that, that was on the 20th of April. A few days after that, we started hearing American machine gun fire. And nearly every day, we'd hear machine gun fire. And Captain Helton now talked about trying to get away from the column. We'd walk during the day, and the Germans would put us in the barn at night. And then we'd sleep in the hay. They'd dig up under the hay for cover. And on the 2nd of May, the day before, we heard quite a bit of machine gun fire. When the Americans were getting fairly close. So on the 2nd of May, we got up in a town that we were in. So the night before, when we went into town, and the Germans put us in this barn, there were some German artillery pieces there in town. The next morning when we got up, those artillery pieces were gone. So we knew the Americans must be getting pretty close. And it was drizzling rain and snowing on the 2nd of May. And Carl said, we've been talking about getting away with this. He said, the day is the day we're going to do it. So we went back in the barn and hid in the hay. And a lot of times the Germans would come back in there and fire in the hay, be sure there wasn't anybody left in there. But we were lucky this morning they didn't do that. But I think they were anxious to get away from there too, because they were hurrying to get away, and looked to me like they would just wait and let the Americans go ahead and take over, but they didn't want to do that. Apparently there was whoever was in charge of the group was pretty hard German. And then after the column left and after it got to be daylight, we ventured out, and the family that owned the place where we were nice to us. We told them we were sick. And come to find out, there was about 6 or 8 prisoners decided that was the morning to escape. And when we told them told the people that, they said they want to get a doctor for us. And we don't need a doctor. But we knew if they got a German doctor in there, he would report us. But that wouldn't do, and we didn't know it, but here come a German doctor and a nurse to examine all of us. Now, he turned out to be real nice, too. And he knew what was going on. He just kind of go through the motions, but he was kind of enjoying talking to us. Then there was a Belgian laborer that had been a prisoner of the Germans since they took Belgium. He had been there working on the farm. I don't know how he found out we were there, but he came. He could speak broken English. And he said the Americans are only 6 kilometers from here. He said, why don't you go there? Well, we can't go 6 kilometers through the daylight. And he said, well, I'll go get them for you. So, of course, we didn't know whether to believe it or not. But sure enough, early in the afternoon, here came 3 jeeps with American soldiers. And this Belgian went back and told them that they sent a patrol up there to see what it was. And we thought, well, here we are, we're liberated. But those soldiers said, no, we're not going to take you back anywhere. Said, you can get back on your own. Said, since we're here in town, we're going to set up an outpost and get ready for a division to move up here. I think it was the 13th Armored Division. So the Belgian went somewhere and commandeered an old wood-burning truck that he could drive it. Because he wanted to get out of there too. So he fired up that truck, picked us up, and we headed to the American lines. And of course these guys in the Jeep that was in there, cavalry, I don't remember the number, but in their cavalry unit that did patrol work, radioed back and told them we were coming. So we got back to the 13th Armored Division. And they were going through town that they had just taken, going through all the houses, confiscating pistols and guns and ammunition, everything that they could. They had a big fire going out in the street, and all those guys just come in and throwing all that stuff in the fire. And about the same thing, we don't have time for food with you. He said, you can wait till the supply truck or something comes up here and get back to Nuremberg. So we did. We waited until, I guess it was the next day, when some supply trucks came up. When they started back, we hopped a ride from them, and they would haul that stuff out of Nuremberg, went back to Nuremberg. In Nuremberg, the weather, it took us to an airport. We were bringing in supplies. The weather had been bad. It had been raining, so there wasn't any flights coming in. And we didn't want to go give ourselves up to somebody there to report to a hospital or something. We wanted to take our chances on getting back somewhere to France. And well, I guess after a couple of days, C-47 came in, carrying gasoline in 5-gallon cans. And when they unloaded, I guess there was 15 or 20 people had been prisoners that had been liberated and escaped from columns and had worked their way back to Nuremberg. And we were just kind of grouped together, waiting, hanging around this airport, waiting for something to happen. And so didn't want to report to any official because we were afraid they'd make us go to the hospital. So finally, when the weather broke, these planes came in. And we got to head the chief pilot, found him, and asked him where they were from, and they were flying, bringing in gasoline from Reims, France. And they told us that General Eisenhower had moved his headquarters to Reeves. So we asked if we could hitch a ride with him and go back to Reeves. He said, no. He said, my orders are to unload this gas and come back empty. So we kept talking and told him who we were. And so finally the pilot said, okay, I'll go call General Eisenhower's headquarters. He said, we'll do whatever they say. He thought they were going to say, come on back, leave him alone. But when he came back, he kind of shook his head. He said, you guys get on board. He said, General Eisenhower said to bring you to Reeves, stop and refuel and take you to La Harpe. So we went to La Harpe. The airport in La Harpe, it was night when we got there. But we got on the plane and we flew to Reeves. And C-47 couldn't fly that far without refueling. So that's good. They stopped in Reeves and refueled, and then flew us on to La Harpe. It was night when we got to La Harpe. And the pilot told us, he said, now this airstrip here in La Harpe is too short for this plane to land. But he said, we're going to get you in there someplace. So he circled that field about 3 times. And finally was apparently coming over a hill. He had to drop that plane down real fast to get full length of the runway. And about the 3rd shot, he dropped that thing. Make it. And at La Harpe, they had a prisoner of war processing. It was set up for processing prisoners. So that's the reason he had to throw us back to there. Of course, the first thing they did in La Harpe was we had on the same clothes we've been wearing for 3 months. You can imagine the condition. During that entire period, had 1 bath. And we were a little lousy. But they had a setup where you take off all your clothes, remove all your hair. You're treated for lice. And you go through the deal, and there's a big room set up with all your clothes. Pick out new clothes. And when you come out the far end, we were fully dressed. And it was just a big hospital. With a diet set up, it's basically for people that hadn't had any food in a long time. Very light food. Things that we do that we shouldn't eat. And because when we first was able to get a hold of a C ration or K ration when we got back to American troops when we got out of Hamilburg that first time. It made us sick. Ooh, sick as a dog. I thought after being hungry for as long, there wasn't anything that I couldn't eat. And of course, we were supposed to eat about 5, 6, 7, 8 times a day. They had food set up where you could eat whenever you wanted to. And that's what they will encourage you to eat, just a little bit, but often. And no fried food. They had soft-boiled eggs, and a lot of kind of an eggnog mix, and fruit juices and stuff like that. I never could eat a soft-boiled egg. And I thought, well, I could eat that now, but I can't. I still can't eat a soft-boiled egg.
How much, when you were captured, compare physical condition, weight at capture and when you got to La Harpe, to make it easier for us to picture or understand?
I guess I weighed about 185 pounds when I was captured. weighed about 130 when I got back to Lahore. My legs, this part of my leg here, I could lap my fingers like that. So that's just how much weight we lost. But that was the harshest thing we had was not having any food.
Was there no food to be had, or did they just not feed you, or did you just kind of have to scavenge wherever you?
No, the Germans gave us for breakfast. We'd have a cup of what we called ersatz coffee, and I guess it really is known as ersatz coffee, some kind of a coffee, and a piece of black bread. And then up in the day we'd have a bowl of potato soup. And that's it, that's all you got. Occasionally we'd get a Red Cross box, which had some food supplements, cigarettes and things like that in it. But at Hamburg in 1945 we didn't get those Red Cross boxes very often. I don't know whether it was we were set up late and we weren't there for them to mail us to what few boxes we got. They were shared by, most of that camp was set up with Serbs, and American Red Cross sent them a lot of food. And I think they shared some of theirs with us. But those boxes would help supplement your food.
So what did they do to you when you got into La Harb and you ate just a little bit? Was there a physical? Did they try to help you eat and try to work stamina and stuff?
I don't remember just exactly what it was, but we had a regular. Of course, we were all examined by doctors and see if we had any ailments other than malnutrition. And then with the diet that we had, and after so many days, it gradually let you eat a little bit more. But it had been set up to treat malnutrition. What's the big thing on malnutrition? Your stomach shrinks, and you can't. It has to be readjusted, and you gradually eat so it expands your stomach so you can hold that food. Then La Harb, they told us we could do what we wanted to. If we wanted to go to Paris, we could go. I said, "You're catch the first boat home." So there's none scheduled right now. And if you want to go to Paris, spend a few days, well, go ahead and go. If you miss the first boat, you catch the next one. I don't think anybody went to Paris. But they didn't want to miss that first boat. And I forgot, we were there about 10 or 12 days before a supply ship came in. And they unloaded the supplies for the American troops. And then they put us on board and headed for home.
How many were there? How many were there?
I don't remember. I've got a list of all the officers that was on that. The ship was the Marine Angel, and I can't remember how many they carried. But by carrying supplies over, it was a small supply ship. The troops didn't have enough weight to hold it in the water, so they poured big chunks of concrete over the deck of that ship so it would have enough weight to hold it down in the water.
It would be too high in the water?
Yeah. See, the human body don't have the weight, because they'd probably carry tanks or ammunition or don't tell them what over there. They don't have weight to give it enough weight. The big square concrete block poured on the deck. So they had to do all that before we could get loaded up and ready to come back.
When you got back to the States, prisoners of war, what was the process? Were you expected to go back and serve again after you recovered, or what was the attitude of the government towards y'all?
We came back to No, we got back to America and got on a train, headed back to, I think nearly all of them had been prisoners of war. And of course, we had headed back to Fort Sam Houston, San Antonio. Coming through, I think it was Columbus, Ohio. The conductor said the train stopped. And he came back in our car and he said, "We're going to be here about 30 minutes. And there was just a street there and a little old beer store. And he said, "Hey, we want to run over and get you a beer while you got time to do something." Me and one lieutenant from Oklahoma decided we'd go have a beer. And we ran across that street and looked around and that train was moving. But we came back and tried to catch it and we missed that train. And we didn't know what in the world we were going to do. We never did get our beer. That train was gone, and we couldn't imagine what happened. And the conductor told us what he did, and then the thing leave, and that's put on a siding for some reason, and then whatever was. But anyway, we knew we had to catch that train somewhere. So Columbus, Ohio, there was an airfield. I forgot what the name of it. We went out there, and Air Force had a lot of planes coming back from Europe, bombers, and they were. But that one thing we found out when we were in Nuremberg, Germany, on the 12th of May. We were still there on the 12th. We found out the war was over. And then we go from Columbus, and we found they were flying those bombers in from England, landing in Columbus, and then it was flying them from there into Oklahoma City. So we went out to the airfield to see if we could catch a hover ride on the bomb of Oklahoma City. We did. We got a ride on the bomb of Oklahoma City. And we thought, well, we'll catch that train in Oklahoma City. And when we landed in Oklahoma City, went out to the train depot, and that train had already come through. It was headed for Dallas. I think that's probably the fastest troop train that's ever in the country. So it was on a weekend by then, and wasn't any pilots flying out of Oklahoma City, because that was a nice place to spend the weekend. So we couldn't get a ride. And we were afraid we might get in trouble if we didn't get to San Antonio like our order said with that train. Because all our clothes and everything was on that train. And so we couldn't find a way out of there. We couldn't find a bus that would go. And finally we found a cab driver that would take us to Dallas. So we rented a cab to go to Dallas. And we got to Dallas, and that train was already gone. My folks lived right there in Garland. I didn't even take time to call them. We asked that cab driver he'd take us to San Antonio, and he agreed to take us to San Antonio. We got to San Antonio and went out to Fort Sam Houston. The train had already been there and unloaded and went out on the field, and there was our duffel bags. The men took them off. The other guys on the train took their clothes off and set them out there. But the guy from Oklahoma City charged us $50, $25 a piece, taxi from Oklahoma City to San Antonio. I think he enjoyed the trip as much as we did. Anyway, we reported that. We don't care. So if you don't show up down here, we figured you went through your hometown and you want to spend a few days. If we'd known that, we wouldn't have been in such a big hurry to get to San Antonio. But anyway, that was the attitude that they had. They gave us all 60-day leave. That was another coincidence. Marvin had lived in Sanderson with her folks. And she knew what day I was going to be in San Antonio. She was going to meet me in San Antonio. Had a new baby had been born in January. And this was June. She was supposed to have a reservation in a hotel. I believe it was San Anthony Hotel. When she got to San Antonio, something happened. She couldn't get her room. So she had to go to another hotel. She'd been trying to get a hold of me or leave word or something so that when I got in, I'd know where to come to meet her. And of course, first thing I did when I got there, I tried to find her. And I called to St. Anthony and found out that she wasn't there. And I thought, well, she's gone out to visit some of the girls she knew out at the nursing home. I went out there. And we had a terrible time for about 3 hours trying to find one another in San Antonio. But I've forgotten how it just exactly what happened, but anyway, we finally got together. But that was quite a trip to try to get back from missing that train. And wow. To come to find out then they didn't care. We don't care what you do. You guys have been gone a long time, and we figured you'd be just decided to stay home for a few days.
Did you leave the Army right after that, or were you still enlisted?
No, I stayed in the Army. I thought maybe I'd make it a career. After a 60-day leave, I went back to Fort Sam Houston, San Antonio. And at Fort Sam Houston is where this interview took place on War Crimes Commission. That I had been at Ludwigsburg, and that was one of the camps that they were investigating. And that's the part that I don't remember. But from Fort Sam Houston, I was assigned to Fort Ord, California, at a replacement depot. So everybody and I went to Fort Ord, California. And let's see, June, July, August, I guess about the 1st September. And we were processing troops, sending them to Japan. A lot of troops coming back. They had gone to Europe, but maybe just got there and never had been assigned to units. And they just picked a lot of them up and sent them back to go in the other direction. And that's what we were doing, assigning a lot of people coming back from Europe, especially officers that had been in the Air Force. They didn't need all those pilots and Air Force officers, and they had a lot of them if they wanted to stay in the service. They let them stay in the service at the grade of Master Sergeant or First Sergeant. And at one time, I had about 50 First Sergeants in my company out there. Now you talk about a bunch trying to control. There's 50 First Sergeants that had been lieutenants and captains. My biggest problem was trying to get them up in the morning and make their beds. But we lived through it, and of course, then too, the Japanese War then was over. And then we had, of course, those companies out there with that they didn't need anymore. They didn't need to send any more troops to the Pacific. So it pretty well just broke up again at the end. But I was assigned in the 2nd Armored Division. Was stationed out, I believe it was Camp Cook, California. But they were fixing to come to Camp Hood in Texas. So I was assigned to the 2nd Armored Division. So I went to Camp Cook. It wasn't very far from over. Maribel was living in Salinas, California. So she stayed in Salinas, and I went down to Cook for just a few days and received orders in to go to Fort Hood, or it was Camp Hood then, in Texas, with the 2nd Army. So we came back to Texas and we lived in Temple. and I was with the 2nd Armored Division, 41st Armored Infantry Battalion. And I had signed up. I would like to have gone back to Europe and gone through some of those towns that we've gone through and visited. And so I signed up to go back overseas. And of course, the 2nd Armored had been overseas, and they were training, and they were going, because it was a regular Army unit that was going to continue to be Army unit. And I don't know, sometime in 1946, they were looking for officers to be in a CIC, Counter Intelligence Corps. And I was selected to be, if I wanted to, go to the CIC school. And I had to agree, as soon as we graduated from school, to go directly overseas without a leave. So I thought, well, that'd be a good chance to go overseas, and I could take Mary with her, or bring her over with later. So we went to school in Baltimore, Maryland, Hollenberg Center Depot, to learn to be a CIC agent. As a special agent for an investigation, or learn to speak. We had a 6 weeks course in German. That had we gone directly to Germany and used the language, we were supposed to pick it up, because after just a few days in German language class, wasn't anything but German spoken to you. You had to pick it up. But not going to Germany after that, I don't remember any of it at all. But when we graduated from CIC school, then Army said, well, we don't need anybody. We don't have assignments for you right now. So they put us on temporary duty at Fort Meade, Maryland. We were processing investigations that CIC agents had sent in. We'd read a bunch of reports and summarize all it was. Be report from agents on one person that they were investigating. We had to summarize all of that and put it together. And after 30 days, well, they said, we still don't need anybody over in Europe, so we'll let you have a 30-day leave. So I went home for 30 days. Then went back to Baltimore. They still didn't have a place for us to go. They put us on 30 days temporary duty. And on temporary duty, you can't have your family with you. So I'd been up in Baltimore all this time. Maribel was in Texas. And then one day they said, anybody wants to, if they want to get out of the service, well, you can. And I thought, well, I'm tired of fooling around this mess. I want to get out. I don't want to spend another 30 years messing around like this. So I went down and signed up to be discharged from the service. The next day, the adjutant called. Said, Lieutenant Drum, I've got 2 sets of orders for you. I said, what? He said, yes, sir, I've got 2 sets of orders. He said, one set says you're going to Germany. The other set says you're going to separation center. That's what I called my wife last night and told her I was coming home, so I'm going home. She said, okay. So that's how that ended.
Well, I appreciate our time this afternoon. I'm not sure. I may have to come back at some point and do a little more with you, but today we're going to have to quit. But I appreciate it a lot.
Well, I think we maybe covered everything. I think
this may fill in some spots for me.
I think it will.
Okay.